All right, so welcome everybody to Ask Some Praxis. It's January 26th, and today's topic is on building accessible solutions. We really wanted to focus today on accessibility, and you know everybody here, Mike is out, so feel free to give him all the assignments and make fun of him ad nauseum. We all come at all of these from a different point of view. So you'll be seeing quite a bit of me and Emily today, but I'm sure everybody else will sort of jump in if need be. So we are going to talk about accessibility, and feel free, come off mute or ask a question in the chat if you have anything. We did sort of come at this with a little bit more prepared stuff than we do when we had previously. Just so that we can sort of show different accessible solutions and talk about what accessibility means in terms of Microsoft 365. So we're going to talk about what is accessibility. We're going to talk a little bit about sort of building custom solutions for that, a little bit about themes, and then building an accessible intranet. So our focus really here is on understanding what accessibility means and then how to leverage the tools that we have in M365.
And I think one of the other things we were going to talk about or say is that, there's a lot of people who have different experiences with accessibility depending on the people that they've worked with who might need some of these special features. So obviously we'd love to hear stories from others who have, seen different things or whatever.
Absolutely. Okay, so I like to start with a little bit of a definition. I like to try to sort of keep things very broad. And so accessibility is essential for organizations that want to create and provide high quality tools that don't exclude people from using their services and products. And I think this is really important because it's a very broad brush, because ability and accessibility is a very broad term. So when talking about web accessibility, the first thing to do is to make sure that it's usable by all of your users, regardless of what their ability is. It's important to make sure that you don't assume that your users are using a keyboard, a mouse, and a monitor. I think it's interesting. I had issues with my hands and had surgery and was in a cast for 12 weeks. And I couldn't use one of my hands for a very long time, and it was really, really challenging. Definitely not at the level of someone with a permanent disability, but I was really struggling to try to do some very basic tasks.
Yeah, I had the same problem when I hurt my hand with the Xbox. Yeah.
Yes. How do you game? How do you game? I mean, really?
Exactly.
No, but I had to go to work the next week, and I got no, I just got this tip of my finger. Yeah, it was tough. Exactly. That was 12 years ago, so it's gotten better since then. But yeah.
Yep. The other thing to think about when you're thinking of accessibility is, it's not always what you can see. It's not always the ability to, whether it's a physical impairment or, the lack of, or vision impairment or something like that. And finally, depending on where you live and what the jurisdiction is, it could actually be against the law to have your application or your site or your app be not accessible. All right. So I think we started to talk about this from an accessibility standpoint, thinking about how you interact with users. It's not just about that physical part. It could be cognitive abilities. It could be someone that has dyslexia. It could be someone with anxiety that can't sit for an extended period of time. Thinking about physical abilities. Obviously, those are sort of the ones that folks get noticed, but also eyesight. Whether that be, diseases of the eye or lack of vision, partial vision, or color blindness. These are a lot of things that we don't necessarily see. Hearing issues, whether someone is completely deaf or whether they're just partially deaf. So you've got to sort of keep all of that in mind as you're building your different solutions. And whether this is a custom solution you're building, or whether this is just whether or not you're building content on a page, these are all the things to sort of keep in the back of your mind. All right. The other thing to think about is literacy level. Now, if you're building your intranet and your folks are, factory workers on the floor, they may have a different level of education. They may be non-native language speakers. I'm living in Iceland right now, and I am definitively a non-native language speaker, and I struggle trying to get, to read things, like street signs. So keeping that in mind, that while it may not be a physical disability, you do need to take into consideration that literacy level. Also, again, depending on that audience, bandwidth limitations, right? Are they connecting from home where they may or may not have, high-speed access? Are they bringing their own device? Because there's certainly a socioeconomic issues around bringing your own device. Not all of us have the latest iPhone 13 or the latest, Pixel or whatever. Some folks are on older technology that are going to operate slower, have smaller screen sizes. Okay. From a design perspective, things to keep in mind are your font choices, right? So you want to make sure that your fonts are readable. They're very clear. From a sizing perspective, I am old, and I think the ability for me to read small type has gotten much worse in the last few years. So keeping in mind as you're building in your content to keep the font sizes, and Emily's going to give us an example of that in a scotch, as well as color and contrast. And those are the different colors and how they interact with each other. And we're going to talk about the theme designer. I'm reminded of, it is totally, and I'm reminded of Todd's blog, which until I complained for like a million times, it was like 10-point font. And even on a good day, I couldn't. It was really, really small.
My blog is a classic.
Well, yeah, and not a good classic.
Yeah. But I gave you the code to fix it.
Valid.
You did.
Did you use it?
I did, but I've had to rebuild the server since then, so I can't remember if it still works. We should talk.
This is terrible.
All right. Anyway, it's important to think about color and contrast, as well as writing styles, and providing coding best practices. The other thing to think about is whenever you're using any kind of multimedia, whether it's imagery or audio or visual, to provide that alternate text so that folks who can't see it or can't hear it have the ability, or may struggle with that, have the ability to still get the context. It's part of the reason why we take the videos of this, so that we can get transcripts as well. Okay, so I'm going to go and I'm going to do one thing beforehand. I want to show the theme designer, because when we're talking about color and contrast, I think it's super important for folks. When we talk about M365, all right, and because I'm doing that, now I need to share my screen.
Yeah, so this will be interesting. Do you just end the slide?
So let me know what happened.
Yeah, we got your screen. Good job.
Cool. All right. So when you're creating a theme for M365, it's aka.ms/theme designer, I think. The link is in the bottom. And this is one of those things that helps you, provide brand colors for your intranet. And you can see Microsoft has stripped this down. They only give us 3 opportunities to change the color, whether it's your primary color, your text color, or your background color. And then it takes all of those things and it sort of scales them into different slots. And so if you scroll down, you can see all the different scales from the primary color all the way down to white. And then it takes all of these things and it shakes them all up and it uses them in different combinations across the entire application. But one of the interesting things to show when you come in is if you look here in this accessibility checker, this checks all of the different color combinations and helps you make a wise choice on which colors to use. When we do this for our clients, generally we'll go to their comms team or whoever's in charge of branding or marketing and get sort of a style guide from them. And we'll enter colors. Now, this is an example of a client that was that had an example of a palette that wasn't accessible. And hopefully I forgot to label these. So We're gonna yow. All right. So their primary color was red. And if you take a look at this, if I put the red in as a primary color, this is going to tell me right away where things are not accessible. And that right here is this contrast ratio. Contrast ratio needs to be what's called a 4.5 or greater. And this color, which is primary color on background, which is the red on the white. So it's learn more. It's these colors right here for the little icons. Those aren't accessible. Those don't meet the right requirements. So we want to not use this, right? And for them, what I ended up doing was just sort of adapting this color just a teeny tiny bit. And I'm going to hope that yeah. And so by just adjusting this to a shade darker, we then got to change the accessibility and actually have the contrast ratio match.
And then all the brand people at the company had a hemorrhage probably.
Oh,
they
yeah.
Actually,
oh yeah.
They did. But when I explained to them about the difference in accessibility and making sure that it reached, and then they looked at it, to be honest, you can, when you're looking for it, you can notice, but if you're not looking for it, you can't really tell. And yep. I can show you because I actually loaded the two different ones as themes. Now, keep in mind this bright red, I would never use this as a theme because this is too red and just ugly. But this one's not accessible. This is the one that is accessible. You can see this one's a little darker. So if you're looking at it, you can see it.
Yeah, it looks so much easier to read, like so significantly.
Right. But it's a really tiny change that then helps folks actually be able to use your site. The other thing to think about is there's actually an accessibility checker, and I had it loaded and then I went to a different screen, which there's a link, but you can actually put the colors in and get what the contrast ratio is. So if I change this, to like a blue, or if I change this to like, something like that, you can see the contrast ratio goes way down. So obviously, blue on black is not something that you want to do, but you can sort of play around with that. Okay. I think the only other thing that I wanted to show was accessibility checking. And if you don't use it, if you're in charge of looking at accessibility, something really important to know is that Firefox has an accessibility checker built into it. And I know, this is basically the only thing I use Firefox for, but but if you come in and look at the developer toolbar, so you can see this is the accessible theme, here's the not accessible theme. And if you turn on the dev toolbar, you can see there's actually an accessibility tab here. And there's a couple of things that are super cool about this. The first is that you can actually simulate what can happen, what it looks like for folks with different types of issues, visual issues. So if someone's colorblind with no red, this is what your site's going to look like. So if you think about it, if you're building a stock ticker or you put emphasis on something where red is bad and green is good, right? And you're using text and making that a color, or a number and making that a color, someone with no red in their vision isn't going to be able to get what you're saying. So for like a stock ticker, you want an up arrow and a number. And it doesn't matter what color it is. I mean, red would be the most logical choice, but if somebody has no green, they can see that. And you'll notice also, think about the imagery, how the imagery is changing. So this is what it looks like for somebody that has contrast loss. So they're getting a much fuzzier picture. These pictures don't resonate quite so well. So you may want to think about using more stark imagery depending on what you're trying to convey. But the other thing it does is it lets you actually check for issues. And you can see there's a whole bunch of issues in here that relate to accessibility. None of them have to do with our theme. Actually, some of them do, because this is the not acceptable one. But anyway, so you can sort of come through here and you can help figure out how to remediate some of the issues, because not only does it tell you what's wrong, it gives you the ability to click and learn more and figure out how to fix that. All right. So I'm going to switch back, Emily, and then I'm going to probably going to start over at the beginning, right?
Yeah, I think it does.
That's lame.
Oh, well.
Well, while we navigate to our slide, one of the things to think about is very often accessibility is like, oh, that's just a problem for the developers. I'm just a site owner and I'm putting content into my site. There are still some areas where you are responsible for accessibility within your SharePoint Online. So the focus of what I'll be talking about for the next 10-ish minutes is about building an accessible intranet. And the number one thing that I see people do wrong is to build their text and their content in a page and use font size or color to provide emphasis. So this isn't going to come across on a screen reader. You should actually use the styles, which I have shown in that green box on the screen in the dropdown, to use the different heading styles. And you should have one H1 per page only. And then after that, use heading 2 and heading 3 for your different sections. Now, this isn't just going to help people who are using screen readers. When people are reading on the web, they're only scanning and doing what is called satisficing. So they're just scanning to see until they've satisfied the answer to their question. So if I'm scanning on a page and there's a wall of text, I'm not going to get a lot of answers. But if there's meaningful headers throughout the page, I'm going to be able to get a table of contents of what's on that page and know exactly where I need to dive in. And even better, whenever you use those heading styles, Microsoft provides you with anchor links. So if someone emails you a question about something on a page, you can link them to that exact spot on the page to help them as well. So header styles really do help absolutely everybody. The next thing to think about when you're typing on your intranet is using conventional capitalization. Next slide, Derek. So you can see the first sentence is a lot easier to read than the second sentence. And this is just how we're used to reading in books and online as well. A lot of times people will use the first letter capitalization for their headers. Again, it makes it harder to scan and it doesn't denote importance because, again, screen readers aren't going to tell you when there's capitalization. You also want to have predictable navigation. So when I am looking at this navigation here, my tier 1 is destinations, travel assistance, and expense report. My tier 2 is North America, South America, and then I have a tier 3 listing out different cities. I don't want North America to be clickable and South America to not be clickable. That's an inconsistent experience. So what I recommend is having your tier 1 and your tier 3 links be the ones that are clickable, and then use a label for your tier 2. Speaking of links, I'm sure you have seen this everywhere. Learn more and click here. Please, please, please do not do this. It doesn't let us know what it leads to. There's a really unclear information sent. If there's multiple things on the page, does click here go to all the same link every time it's listed on the page? There's no way for me to tell the difference between them. And then if we take a peek at what it's like for someone with a screen reader, and we can see here we have beach, city, and wilderness, and each one says learn more. Well, when I'm using a screen reader, what that's like is just learn more, learn more, learn more, which you'll see on the next slide. I don't have the context of these images or the text. So what would be better on our final slide is to make descriptive text labels. And we have some tips for this. So you can see here we have beach, get some sun. City, take in culture. Wilderness, observe nature. They're all different and specific to the links that we're talking about. So how do we make better link labels? First, we want them to be specific. You need to avoid generic language and jargon. We want them to be sincere, so we need to deliver on whatever link promise we make. If I tell you that I'm going to take you to a beach excursion page, I can't drop you on the homepage of excursions. I need to actually bring you to that specific beach excursion. They need to be substantial enough to stand on their own, but we also want them succinct enough. You don't want an entire paragraph underlined as a link. So make them just as long as they need to be. So we just talked about all of these different items for accessible content and links. The last one, which Derek hit on a lot in his section as well, is that we want to have alternatives to color to convey important information. So similar to not changing the size of your font to denote meaning, if something's really important on a page, making it red is going to do absolutely nothing for people with color blindness or screen readers. Use a heading style there if it's something that's important and you want it to be captured as people are scanning through the pages. The heading is also going to have a stronger visual hierarchy, so people who don't have any disabilities will be able to see that stand out on the page as well. Now, what about our pictures? Derek mentioned that we should have alt text. Great news. It's absolutely possible to put in alt text in your images in SharePoint Online. Now, please note, it's not the same thing as a caption. So you have to hit the edit button, and in the image pane, that's where you put in your alternative text. You want to make sure that it's descriptive of the context, not just the content. So, for example, if there was an image of a cell phone with a little charger going into it, you wouldn't want to call it charging phone. You would want to say, put charger into bottom of the phone and describe that context of what the image is actually showing. Yes.
We have a question. Has the call to action web part been updated to allow alt text yet?
Ooh, not that I have seen, but I can double check it on that towards the end. That's a great question. All right, and then our last one for accessible pictures and media is to include captions and audio descriptions of the content. Great news, if you're using Stream, this is already done for you. If you're using something else and you're actually embedding those videos, just make sure you don't forget this step. Now, I grabbed a little checklist for us about writing for the web and the web accessibility checklist from W3C. And you'll see on the right, we have talked about everything so far except for the last two. And that relates also to everything on the left side with the writing for the web checklist. So very quickly, we're going to talk about writing in an inverted writing style. So when you write inverted, you have your overview and your summary at the top. This is how you start the page, so someone who lands on it knows what is going to be described on this page and can make a decision whether they want to keep reading or whether they want to leave. So make sure you identify your key points in that open summary, in that top section. Then you want to rank your secondary information, and that's going to help you figure out what those headers you're going to use as you continue down the page. Make sure you write well and concisely. So things like using the active voice. Emily posted the news article, not the news article was posted by Emily. And I will admit, I struggle a lot with using the passive voice. So something that I use all the time is called the Hemingway app. It's hemingwayapp.com. It is free. You can copy and paste your text into it. It will tell you when you're writing in a passive voice. It'll tell you your reading grade level. It'll call out run-on sentences. So it can really help you write better content for these pages.
Word has that kind of checking built into it too, though. You know, we used to use it years ago, and a lot of people stopped using it because it was very strict. But it's there, and you can turn on and off those rules. Sorry to interrupt.
Yeah, great point.
And I think they were saying that some of that's coming. Some of the stuff you get in Word now is coming into M365. I remember hearing that at some point.
That's great. All right, so our next one, front load all elements. So when people are reading on the, the next one was a confusing way to say that. Front load all elements. So people are scanning on the web and they tend to read the first 11 characters. So make sure when you're structuring those headers that you're putting the most important information in the front. So for example, I'm on a benefits site. I don't want to say benefits-medical. I already know I'm on the benefits site, say medical, then benefits. Last but not least, consider adding a summary if it's a really long article. Again, those different header titles come with the anchor link. So what you can do is make a 1/3 right web part, and you can actually make links, and it can serve as your table of contents. I know a long time ago they mentioned some table of contents web part was coming in SharePoint, but I haven't heard about that for a really long time, so I recommend this for now. Last but not least, we have an add-in to the Edge browser called Accessibility Insights for the Web. So if you just hit play on that, Derek, I have a short video going through some of those different checkers.
So this is like an alternative to the Firefox add-in.
It
for
is,
those who don't feel comfortable in the browser console.
Yeah.
And I would put myself as one of those people for sure. Essentially, what you can do is you can turn on tabbing, so you could see what it would be like to be someone who's reading through a screen reader. You can turn on a color contrast, which turns everything to gray, like you saw earlier with Derek. And there's some automatic checks as well. So I highly recommend getting this add-in for your browser.
Cool. All right. And with that, we have our resources, which are now clickable because we're presenting in PowerPoint. We've got the W3C, which is the Accessibility Standards Board. They help make the standards, and then links to a bunch of different things that we've talked about today. And in 2 weeks, a little Valentine's Day themed presentation. We're going to be talking about recent changes in Microsoft 365 that we love.
We have hearts for. Hey, the one thing we didn't mention is, and it's a developer thing, so it may not be of huge interest, but always when you're doing your development for or extensibility projects for the Microsoft 365 platform and using like SharePoint Framework or something else, you want to make sure that you enable themes and use the theme slots in your application development so that those solutions that you build take on the theme that has already been hopefully checked for accessibility into your app. So, and making sure you use all the good development practices for accessibility. So.
Well, that was the other thing is when we were talking about setting this up, someone in our group said, well, what if there's just like one little thing that didn't work right? That wasn't one little thing that didn't meet the contrast ratio. Can we just roll with it? And my answer is definitively no. Absolutely no. And the reason for that is because Microsoft takes all those different theme slots and they mix and match them however they want. And so you don't know how they may be using it in an app somewhere or on a page somewhere. So you could inadvertently, by just sort of leaving one out of the mix, you could inadvertently create black text on a black background, or light blue text on a white background that was just completely unreadable. Oh.
Cool. Well, did anybody else have any more questions, since we have like a minute or two? Bueller?
I'm curious for how many people are on the call, how many people are already talking about accessibility at their organizations?
That's a good question. Does anybody pay attention to this, or is it mostly a no?
Awesome,
Caleb?
we got some hands.
Cool.
Krista, yeah. Not for the intranet, interesting. That is actually interesting.
Oh, shit. Only the intranet.
I'm gonna have to soon. Oh, sorry. Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Interesting. Cool.
So interesting to note, in the U.S., I don't know whether internal applications are required to be accessible, but I'm pretty sure in Canada they are. So I think everything in Canada and in Europe all needs to be accessible to folks.
I think technically in the U.S., anything that's exposed to a larger number of people has to be, but I don't think anyone's ever enforced it.
Yeah, the only thing that happens is, especially with public-facing websites, there are like lawsuits that get sort of put out there to collect money and to force folks to update this. I know folks that happened with Target a few years, 3-4 years ago at Christmas time. They rolled out a brand new site and it wasn't accessible, and they got sued within days.
Please don't anybody sue me because my site's not accessible.
Hang on, Todd. Hold up.
Lawyers.com.
Thanks a lot, Caleb.
We're in the money.
Yes. Okay. All right.
Well, I think that's all we got for today. Thank you, everybody, for coming.
Thank
we
you.
Appreciate it.
Bye.
Bye, everybody.